My name is Phoebe Zerwick. I teach journalism and writing at Wake Forest University, where I am the director of the journalism program. And I came to teaching after 20 years as a daily journalist for the Winston-Salem Journal. So all told, I have about 30 years or so of experience in journalism. And in directing the program at Wake Forest, my real interest is in teaching young people about what journalism is, how journalism differs from other forms of media that we all see on our social media feeds, and why we need a robust journalism in a democratic society. It used to be that people got their news from their local newspaper and from one of the three networks on the evening news. There was NBC, CBS, and ABC. And, in that era, journalism certainly was flawed. It was a little bit too focused on white journalists and white sources and establishment sources, and didn't do that great a job writing about immigrant communities or black communities or women. But journalists were united by this common purpose of holding the powerful to account and keeping check on power and keeping check on what all levels of government were doing, and on telling people the stories they needed to know to live in a free and democratic society. And the first thing that really happened to undermine what I think of as accountability journalism, of the fourth estate, of the kind of journalism that holds government in check, was the rise of the internet. And people think that somehow or other that undermined people's interest in reading the news, but what that really did was it destroyed the advertising revenue that had always supported journalism. And so instead of going to a newspaper to sell a used bike or a used car, to put your want ads in, the internet replaced that and provided anybody who needed to advertise something a free or less expensive place to advertise. So around in the late 90s and early 2000s, the financial support for newspapers disappeared. And so we lost more than 1,000 local newspapers in this country, and thousands of journalists lost their jobs. And then we saw the explosion of social media. And so most people now get their news from Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or even Instagram. And it's not clear to a lot of us what the source is of that news. And so it can be propaganda, it can be political news, it can be lies, it can be anything. And too many people in this country have lost the ability to distinguish between truth and fiction, news and propaganda, news and opinion. And the other thing that's happened is that there are fewer journalists. So there are over 1,000 communities in this country that don't have a daily newspaper any longer, which means that there's nobody watching what happens at City Hall, nobody watching what's happening in local courthouses, fewer and fewer people covering what's happening in state legislatures. And so what that means large scale is that the public really doesn't know what its elected officials are up to. So there are big national newspapers that are doing great. The New York Times is flourishing, and so there are plenty of journalists doing great reporting about the president, even about the Senate, to some extent about Congress. But it's the whole next level of government that is not really being covered. And it's a real crisis for us in this country, and a real crisis for democracy, because without journalists holding the powerful to account, people in power begin to abuse their power. And without a public that knows how to distinguish between real journalism and the lies that people put out on social media, we are beginning to have a less and less informed public, and that's just really dangerous. So my hope for our journalism students is that they become better informed citizens and that they understand the value of journalism, its significance, and that they enter adulthood really knowing how to tell truth from fiction, news from opinion, and real journalism from propaganda, and that they learn to become better citizens in a democracy.